Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We have John Edwards, the chair of our technical panel here at the IHBC, and he will give a presentation over the guidance note that he authored, Retrofitting of Traditional Buildings. I'm going to give a quick housekeeping intro, and then we'll go straight to John. We're going to go about 40 minutes presentation with about 20 minutes of Q&A afterwards. This presentation will be available online after, although just the presentation, not the Q&A. So the Q&A is here for your all benefit today. If you do have questions, we're going to wait to the end to field those. We'd ask you to put them in the questions tab that you can find over in your control panel. And other than that, I think we're good with housekeeping. So John, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Michael, for the introduction. Yes, I authored the IHBC retrofit guidance a few years ago. I was asked to do it just before the annual school that took place, I think in 2019 at Nottingham. And I based it on BS 7913, and I'll talk to you more about that in a moment. If I can just introduce myself, I've been in the industry a long time, for over 40 years. I started retrofitting buildings before I even knew I was retrofitting buildings, because we didn't call it retrofit in the 1980s and the 1990s, doing work to building services and building fabric, and getting involved with historic buildings as well. Briefly, I've also been contributing to many sets of guidance over the years. I co-authored the first CIOB guidance on retrofit 10 years ago, actually 11 years ago now, and I'm also a co-author of PAS 2035, PAS 2030, and PAS 2038, which are the BSI Retrofit guidance documents, or standards, I should say, and also a member of the BSI Retrofit Standards Task Group. So today, I'm going to be talking about this particular document, and just to give you an update on where we are. Now, this particular guidance is based upon BS 7913. And BS 7913 is a document I led in the production of quite a few years ago now. And I think this is a very good introduction to the whole subject of what, in the way in which we should be looking at this subject in improving the energy performance of buildings. So in section 531 of BS 7913, it says, the most effective way of ensuring energy efficiency and sustainability is to keep buildings in good repair so that they last as long as possible, do not need replacement, and do not suffer from avoidable decay that would require energy and carbon to rectify. Now that to me is just a common sense statement. And it also goes on and says that these buildings should provide occupancy in an efficient manner involving minimal production of carbon and use of energy without harming the physical performance of the building fabric. I would say again, it's just common sense, but it expresses the way in which we should be looking at older buildings and historic buildings. And finally, it says here, using natural ventilation and light and proper temperature and humidity control for individual rooms are ways of minimizing energy usage that respects the building's material characteristics. Now, like I said, it's a common sense approach. It's what we wrote into BS 7913, but I would say it's more or less it's the approach we should be taking to all buildings. Unfortunately, that is not the mainstream approach. So like I said, I based this guidance, the IHBC guidance, on BS 7913. It's a very short set of guidance. It's basically a process that directs you to and signposts you to other areas where you can get further information, which are not a part of this standard, but they're linked to this particular guidance note. And that's the way we've set out this particular document. Now, we're not going to go into the ins and outs of every single part of this document today, but I will take you through the process later, and I'll also indicate the most pertinent issues which have involved changes to PAS 2035 and PAS 2038 since this document was last revised. But first of all, let us think about what energy efficiency and retrofit is. Is it the same? So let's look at this definition of energy efficiency. used to describe things that use only as much energy as is needed without wasting any. I suppose you all know what energy efficiency means anyway, really. It's a very easy thing to understand. But let's compare the definition of energy efficiency with a definition of retrofit. This is a definition of retrofit from a well-respected dictionary, but I'll read it out in terms of what we are all about, and we're all about buildings, aren't we? So it's adding to a building that did not have it when it was constructed. That's what retrofit is. So you can see there is a big difference between retrofit and energy efficiency. Some people have attempted to develop their own definitions of retrofit to include lots of other things, but let's stick to what the dictionary says, and that's what the dictionary says there. So in a nutshell, you could say that where energy efficiency is concerned, it's very holistic. It includes all the means to improve the energy performance of a building, but retrofit doesn't include all the means to improve the performance, the energy performance of a building, because it's just about adding things to the building. And where this IHBC guidance is concerned, it is about everything. So you could say that this guidance is a bit of a Trojan horse because we're calling it a retrofit guidance, but when you look at the detail, it's more than about retrofit. So when we look at these blue tops, the blue tops is the mainstream guidance for retrofitting buildings in the UK. We have PAS 2035 and PAS 2030, which have been developed for retrofitting dwellings. PAS 2035 is largely a process, and incorporated in that process is PAS 2030, which is what the installers follow. And then for non-domestic buildings, only published in about September last year, we have PAS 2038. Now, both those documents, both the main documents, PAS 2035 and PAS 2038, are largely processes with some elements of standards within them. But the process includes retrofit. It doesn't include anything else other than retrofit, but in fairness to those documents, it does indicate that maintenance and repair can assist in the improvement of the energy performance of a building, and it also states the buildings should be in good repair before we consider retrofitting them. And if we compare these blue tops with BS 7913 and the IHBC guidance, they are holistic documents. They do include everything. They include all the means to improve the energy performance of a building. Just setting the scene. So let's look at this particular process. So the first part of this process is assessing significance. Now, we're not going to go into the ins and outs of assessing significance or any of the other processes here today. I'm just going to outline what they really are. So when we assess a building, in a nutshell, we break down the building into different parts, different areas, components, features, spaces, whatever they are. We break the building down into logical units, and we assess each of these logical units against a criteria, and the criteria is heritage values. And gathering some other criteria together, we can determine what the significance levels are within the building. And that's a very, very important thing for us to do. And then we get to stage two. Stage two is titled the condition survey. But during stage two, we're also understanding the building in terms of its construction, in terms of its materials, understanding the chronological changes which have taken place in that building since it was first constructed. And also looking at the environment inside the building, in looking at how the use of the building is affecting the building, how the building is affecting the use of the building, and looking at the external environment as well, which means looking at where the building is located in respect of weather exposure zones and the geography around the building. And of course, understanding the condition of the building and what we need to do to the building in order to put it in good repair, and also understanding the other things we can do to a building which will in themselves improve the energy performance of that building. So that's number two. And of course, in number two, it does mean taking a building pathological approach. And then we get to stage three. So stage three means we're going about understanding the energy performance of a building. And in the guidance, we mention the two, we differentiate domestic buildings from non-domestic buildings in terms of the type of energy efficiency assessments that we can adopt. And there will be an output in respect of that goes into number four. So whether you undertake number 1, number 2, and number 3 in that order, it doesn't really matter. I've expressed an ideal order, but in the real world, it may be in a different order. But what is most essential is that we undertake 1, 2, and 3 before we undertake stage 4. Stage 4 is about considering and evaluating a mix of works and measures that will improve the energy performance of the building. It takes on board all that knowledge we've got for number 1 in terms of significance. It takes on board all that knowledge we've got for number 2, including, the details of the building, the sort of works we can do to the building to improve its energy performance. And it also looks at number 3 very critically, looking at the way in which the energy performance has been assessed, seeing whether it's reliable, seeing whether it's accurate, and also looking at the measures which have been recommended for number 3 to see if they are feasible. Because if we just undertake the measures in an ad hoc way, very often we're not going to be doing it properly, because what we need to do is take a whole building approach, and that's what number 4 does. It takes a whole building approach, works to the building fabric and the measures. And when we're considering the measures, we are suggesting you use the STBA guidance wheel in order that we understand how those measures are all going to actually work together. And the guidance wheel will allow us to take our retrofit up to a level that is safe for the building and will improve the building alongside all the other work we're going to do. So once we've done number 4, we need to think about cost effectiveness, and we'll go to stage 5, and we may swing back from 4 to 5 a few times until we've determined the optimum range of works and measures that are also the most cost effective. And after stage 5, we then know what we're going to do, or we then know what we want to do, and we'll assess our proposals against the impact they're going to make on the significance of the building in number 6 by undertaking heritage impact assessments. And of course, the significance that we are assessing these proposals against, that's what we determined at stage 1. But when we are undertaking heritage impact assessments, we may want to tweak our proposals, we may want to change our proposals altogether if the impact is too great. So we may swing round to number 4, 5 a few times until we've determined that these are the right proposals to make to the building. These are the things we want to do to the building when we get to stage 7, finalising our proposals, designing and specifying the works and measures. Now we have to consider that going from stages 1 to 7 has taken a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of expertise, a lot of money, a lot of resources, full stop. And we don't want to put all of that at risk by not seeing the work properly implemented at stage 8. So at stage 7, we've got to think about how are we going to do the best that we can do to ensure that the work is going to be implemented properly. And we consider that stage 7. And at stage 7, we're going to be looking at the range of works and measures which will be implemented, and think about the risk that maybe those works and measures may not be implemented properly. And some works and measures will be at more risk than others. So let's look at the most risky ones, and let's consider the impact that could be created by not having those works and measures implemented properly. And where we got those highest risks, it is then up to the contractor at stage 8 to develop a proactive approach to quality management, which should include the development of inspection and test plans, which then records and demonstrates the work has been implemented properly. And then we get to stage 9, the audit and the evaluation. They are two different things in reality. The evaluation is evaluating the building to see whether we've achieved our objectives or not, and also to understand whether we have, and hopefully not, achieved any unintended consequences which could be detrimental to the building. Because we need to know that. We set our objectives out at the very beginning. We need to see if we've achieved those objectives. And then we got the audit, which can be carried out throughout the project, or most certainly at the end, to see whether the work undertaken is the work that we are paying for. Whoever's paying for it, seeing that they are paying for it, they've got what they're paying for. So that's the overall process. It is an holistic approach because it isn't just about retrofit. So what is the mainstream approach to retrofitting traditional buildings? Well, there may be some good examples out there. There are certainly many, many thousands of poor examples of retrofit. This is in Caira, in Maesteg, in South Wales. It's a place that's received a lot of attention over many years, but very recently, an awful lot of attention. These are traditional buildings. They've been retrofitted, and they've created misery for the people who actually live in these buildings. They're still just about habitable, but they're not a great place to live, to be honest. Now, if anybody was to show me what was proposed to these buildings 10 or 15 years ago when the proposals were being developed, I would have said, just don't do it. It is not a wise thing to do. But lots of people thought it was a wise thing to do. People in government, people in local authorities, people monitoring the work, people doing the work. They must have all thought it was a good thing to do because they did it. And they haven't just done it here, they've done it all over the country, all over the UK. We have the same type of work being carried out. And I'm afraid some of this poor work is still being carried out today to many traditional buildings. I'll talk more about that later. But what we've got here is people think they understand what they're doing, but they don't understand. They don't understand the traditional buildings. So you've got a poor concept, you've got poor design, maybe no design, but certainly some of the detailing would comply with the British Board of Argument certificates, which showing design detailing. The wrong materials, and we know there's a lot of BBA certificates around today which don't state that some of these materials are not suitable for traditional buildings, and you've got poor quality workmanship. All that equals a disaster, a disaster. So the mainstream approach to retrofitting traditional buildings, on the whole, has not been a good one. And the mainstream solution is each home counts, published a few years ago, and some good things have come out of the each home counts report. It was meant to be a game changer, and it has improved things to some degree. It's meant, and it's brought about the retrofit standards framework. And if you look at the objectives of the framework, how can anybody argue against these objectives and the principles involved? To improve the functionality and durability of buildings, well, it must be a good thing. It must be a good thing. It is a good thing. Improving the comfort and well-being of occupants, obviously a good thing. Improving energy efficiency, well, obviously that's what that is all about. Reducing environmental impact, protecting and enhancing architectural heritage. I mean, that's something we all want to see, isn't it? Minimizing the performance gap, avoiding unintended consequences. And they are objectives because many of these things have simply not happened in the past. And if you look at this example of these properties in Maesteg, we certainly weren't improving any of those objectives there. So it is certainly time to change, time for change, I should say. So this is the actual framework itself. If I was to show you this framework 12 months ago, or less than 12 months ago, I would be saying to you that the core part of this document is PAS 2035, the core document for retrofitting dwellings. But since September last year, we've also seen the publication of PAS 2038, which is the equivalent document to PAS 2035, but in reality very different to it. And so when we're looking at this framework now, it has two core parts, and that is PAS 2035 and PAS 2038, depending on whether you're dealing with a domestic building or a non-domestic building. We can see that within this framework, we've got non-BSI standards. You can read them for yourselves here. We've got existing BSI standards, which is great. And it's good to see BS 7913 as part of that framework, but don't get your hopes up too much because it's not referred to in all respects. It's only referred to where PAS 2035 and PAS 2038 directs it to be referred to. So in PAS 2038, it's only directed to a small degree, but PAS 2038 also involves the European standard for retrofitting historic buildings as well. PAS 2035 does not refer to that European standard, but does refer to BS 7913 more extensively, but not in all respects, I'm afraid to say. And then we got new BSI standards which are being produced. I'm actually working on one myself. I'm working on the retrofit assessment British standard, which is due to be published next year. So let's look at these mainstream documents now, PAS 2035 and PAS 2038. Let's do some comparisons and let's pick up some of the heritage issues that I'm sure you're all interested in. Like I said earlier, both these documents are largely processes, but there are some elements of standards within them. There are new roles which are being created in PAS 2035 and not so much in PAS 2038. In PAS 2038, it's being set up on the basis that the retrofit process could be incorporated into the redevelopment of a building, the refurbishment of a non-domestic building, and attempts to take a more professional team approach, the sort of approach you would take if you were going to refurbish a commercial building. For example, you would set up your professional team, the project manager, the architect, the engineer, and so on and so forth. And that's what it intends to do here. There are different levels of competencies required within PAS 2038, which I'll talk about in a moment. And there is a new role, I suppose, a new specific role, which would be the Retrofit Lead Professional, which is the professional who has overall responsibility for the project. And then in PAS 2035, if you're not familiar with PAS 2035 or domestic retrofit, then you will not be familiar with some of these new roles which are being developed specifically for them. We have the Retrofit Coordinator. Now, it's only got some sort of officialdom since 2019 when PAS 2035 was first published, but it's been around for quite a few years. I actually did the initial training in the Retrofit Coordinator training many years ago, and that Retrofit Coordinator person is the person who's overall responsible for the project, right from the time where it's just an idea, through the implementation, through the building into use and evaluation. It's responsibility of that person, the Retrofit Coordinator. And then we've got another role which has been developed for this, which is the Retrofit Assessor. Okay, so that's the person responsible for retrofit assessment, which means responsible for assessing the energy performance, or maybe not producing the EPC, but could be producing the EPC, or certainly assessing the EPC, looking at what measures have been installed already, looking at the condition of the building, doing an occupancy assessment of the building, and also doing, if it's an older traditional building, doesn't have to be a listed building or building in a conservation area, that person is also responsible for undertaking a significance analysis and heritage impact assessments as well. And then you've also got the designer involved, quite a specific role for the designer, the retrofit evaluator, and the installer comes under PAS 2030. So that's what comes under PAS 2035. But like I said, with both these documents, PAS 2035 and PAS 2038, they're just about retrofit, okay? It's just about retrofit. There are risk paths in PAS 2035, so early on in the process, the Retrofit Coordinator will place a project into, by going through a certain stipulated criteria, will place a project into either the lowest risk, which is risk A, or the highest risk, which is risk C, or the middle risk, which is B. And it does have a fundamental difference, I would say, in terms of the way in which a project is dealt with, whether it's in A, B, or C. A is quite straightforward. B and C involves different levels of competencies of individuals involved in the whole process, and that can have an impact on the outcome, I would say. In PAS 2038, there are no risk paths because it's relying on the fact that you have got professional team members who are used to running projects on those types of buildings who will decide how they're going to deal with that project. Now, when I say tools, I'm talking about mechanisms and matrices and online tools. That is limited in PAS 2035. One good tool, I would say, in PAS 2035 is the Measure Interaction Matrix, which is a good tool. So when you're evaluating the measures to be installed, you're evaluating measures against each other. And that tool will tell you that some measures should not be installed in the building if other measures are being incorporated. And it tells you the approach you should be taking with some measures in interacting with each other, or we don't need to worry about that interaction. That again is not included in PAS 2038. Again, it's relying on that professional team membership, professionalism in order to determine all that. What both those documents are doing, they're really missing a trick in not referring to the STBA guidance wheel, which is an excellent online tool. I don't know whether you've seen it, maybe some of you have, but if you click on the cursor, a wheel, say you want to install internal wall insulation, arrows will spring out, and then you put to lots of different other measures and things you need to consider. Put your cursor on the ends of those other arrows, and other arrows will spring out. So it shows you what the impact would be of measures upon each other. It will take you towards the highest level of retrofit you can do to the building that is safe for the building and will work, and take you away from doing things which are not the sort of things you should be doing to a building. It's an excellent tool. I will say that. It's an excellent tool. And I would say that's a tool that should be used for anybody involved with traditional buildings or historic buildings. And to be perfectly honest, although it may have its limitations, I would say it's a tool I would use for a building of any age, as long as you're using it intelligently. Now, where qualifications and competencies are concerned, again, these two documents are very different. To some degree, I mean, I don't want to be too critical here, because PAS 2035 has brought us into a much better place than where we were before PAS 2035. But some level of competencies are quite low. So I mentioned all the things that the retrofit assessor needs to do. And if the property is in risk path B, where many traditional buildings they're not listed buildings or buildings in conservation areas, but if you have an ordinary everyday traditional building, it may very well end up in risk path B. And in risk path B, for example, the retrofit assessor has to do the condition survey, they have to do the significance analysis and heritage impact assessments, but they've never been taught specifically how to do a significance analysis or heritage impact assessment, and they may not even have training in how to inspect a traditional building, because the lowest level of competency, there are many retrofit assessors go well above this. So I'm just talking about the lowest level of competency belongs to those, I suppose, who've recently qualified as maybe retrofit domestic energy assessors, which you do your 5 days of training with a multiple choice test at the end, do one domestic energy assessment supervised, and then do 4 others which are not supervised, and then your domestic energy assessor. Do a couple of days of training on PAS 2035, and then you could be deemed to be a retrofit assessor. Now that is not a very high level of training, isn't it? Or competency, I would say, for being a retrofit assessor on a traditional building. So what I'm saying there is that I think is on the low side, in my opinion. You may all disagree with me, but I think that is on the low side. But there are retrofit assessors who are a lot higher level of competence than that, but that's the lowest level I just described. And if a retrofit assessor, for example, is doing work on a traditional building which has special protection or any protected building, then at least they have to get another qualification whereby they will be taught how to do, well, hopefully they'll be taught how to do a significance analysis and heritage impact assessment. Now, I'm not going to talk any more about the competencies in PAS 2035 because we haven't got time to go into all the detail. But where PAS 2038 is concerned, there is a high level of competence involved in that. It is a more of a professional team approach, and many of the, all the activities mentioned in PAS 2038 do require those undertaking those activities to demonstrate they're competent in undertaking those activities. I'll talk more about some of those issues in a moment. Now, where PAS 2030 is concerned, that has principally been produced to work hand in glove with PAS 2035 on domestic buildings. But if we look at PAS 2038, the installation part of PAS 2038 with some caveats now, does refer to past 2030. Okay, that may change to some degree in the future, but that's the way it stands at the moment. But let's go back to these objectives within the BSI Retrofit Standards framework. Improving the functionality and durability of buildings, well, and the occupancy and comfort and well-being, improving energy efficiency, reducing environmental impact, protecting and enhancing the architectural heritage. That will only work, for example, if the retrofit assessment is carried out people who really do understand traditional buildings, doesn't it? Good condition survey, understanding the measures which have been installed, whether they are detrimental or otherwise to the building or not. And also, protecting and enhancing architectural heritage. If people have been trained in to do a significance analysis and heritage impact assessments, can we really ensure that we are going to protect and enhance architectural heritage? I'm not too sure that we will always achieve those objectives in past 2035, to be honest. Not on older buildings. I'm not saying we won't, but I can't say that I would guarantee it on all occasions. But I think there's a much better chance of achieving those objectives where past 2038 is concerned because of the overall approach that's taken. So I want to look at some of the most pertinent issues now where older traditional and historic buildings are concerned, by first of all looking at building conservation competency schemes. Now, in respect to BS 7913, there's a proactive approach towards competencies for everybody involved in anything to do with those buildings. Even when it's referring to maintenance, it talks about membership of building conservation competency schemes. We're talking about accreditation and certification schemes for all individuals involved in absolutely everything. So it's being very holistic in stating that's the approach that should be taken. And as the IHBC guidance is being based upon that, that's what we are stating there. That hasn't changed at all. That hasn't changed at all from when the IHBC guidance was first published. When we're looking at past 2038 and past 2035 and membership requirements of a building conservation competency scheme, they're only talking about designers. So all of those involved in other processes and other activities in past 2035 and past 2038, they do not have to be members of a competency scheme for building conservation. That hasn't changed from when those documents were first published. As far as past 2038 is concerned, I would say that's fairly robust, even though it's not just for designers, even though it's just for designers, I should say. Membership of a building conservation accreditation or certification scheme is required for designers working on all traditional buildings, regardless of whether they have any special protection or not, and all protected buildings, so any historic building. So that's pretty good, I would say. If we now look at past 2035, again, it's only for designers. But if the building is a protected building, a building in a conservation area, or a listed building, then you have to be a member of a building conservation accreditation or certification scheme at the highest level of membership. If the building is a traditional building but doesn't have any special protection, then you must be a member of a building conservation accreditation or certification scheme, but at the lowest level of membership. And something's changed since the new iteration of past 2035, which was published in January and it came into force on the 1st of April, is that the alternative to that is if you have the stipulated traditional building retrofit qualification. Okay, that's the difference. So that's a change. If you've got that qualification, you do not need that low-level membership of a building conservation accreditation or certification scheme if you are a designer working under past 2035. So you can see from here, the most robust approach to this is BS 7913 and the IHBC guidance. The second most robust approach comes from PAS 2038, and the least robust approach is PAS 2035. So let's look at this stipulated qualification in traditional building PAS 2035 and PAS 2038 only recognise one qualification in retrofitting traditional buildings. I don't even know if there is another qualification that exists out there for a short course that will deliver a qualification in that subject. In fact, unless you tell me otherwise, there isn't. I'm very much acquainted with that qualification because I worked on the original set of national occupational standards when I worked for English Heritage years ago. I was part of a team of about 20 people, I think, who worked on developing and delivering a pilot of a course that was formed the basis of this, and that was quite a few years ago, 2016, something like that, where we delivered the pilots in Glasgow, Derbyshire, and Llandarcy in South Wales. And then I was chosen by CITB's, that's the Construction Industry Training Board's National Construction College, to develop a 2-day course to achieve that qualification and also help them get it approved by a qualification awarding body, which was SQA at the time. So I'm very well acquainted with that course. In fact, I'm one of the people who deliver that course and have been for the last 6 or 7 years. And if you want to know more about that course, you can go to the Environment Study Centre. But I will say that there are a number of different organisations that deliver this course now. Most of the other individuals who deliver the course are not heritage professionals. And there is some leeway, if you like, on what the overall content could be. So I will include a lot about the subjects I'm familiar with, historic buildings, traditional buildings. Other people may concentrate on other aspects of it. But it is required by most individuals working in PAS 2038. If you're working on a traditional building, doesn't have to have any special protection or not, and most certainly if you're working on an historic building, a building with special protection. For almost all activities except the designer, because the designer has to be conservation accredited or certified. And then we've got, so if you've never heard of PAS 2038, then you know about it now, and you know what requirements there are if you're going to work to PAS 2038 and it's a traditional building or an historic building. And we refer to the requirements of PAS 2038 and PAS 2035 in the IHBC guidance, so you can be well aware of that. I should have mentioned that before. Now, where PAS 2035 is concerned, there is a limited requirement for this level 3 award qualification. Retrofit assessors, but only for retrofit assessors working on protected buildings. Retrofit coordinators, and I say retrofit coordinators, it doesn't state within PAS 2035 the retrofit coordinators do need this qualification, but it states that retrofit evaluators need this qualification, and retrofit evaluators are in fact retrofit coordinators. So in that sense, in any risk path in PAS 2035, this is a requirement. And retrofit designers for traditional buildings, if they're not a member of a building conservation competency scheme, accreditation or certification, if they're not a member of those schemes, then they need this qualification. So that's a change that's occurred this year. And again, this information is all detailed on the IHBC retrofit guidance. So let's look at some other issues and other concerns. Now, this image here, this comprises houses which are in the conservation area and houses which are not in the conservation area. Now, retrofit assessors must undertake condition surveys of both these buildings, all these houses here, and they're all technically the same, aren't they really? And you need to know what you're doing when you're assessing the condition of these buildings and assessing their construction. Now, where the building is, with the houses, which are in the conservation area, you need to do a a full significance analysis, okay? And although it doesn't state it in PAS 2035, you need to do a heritage impact assessment. If the buildings are outside the conservation area, then you can do a mini significance analysis and a heritage impact assessment. But the only thing is, with the buildings outside the conservation area, you do not need any training in order to undertake your significance analysis and heritage impact assessment. Now, I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about that because if the BSI Retrofit Standards Framework says that one of the objectives is to enhance and protect architectural heritage, I'm not too sure we're going to be able to do that if those undertaking significance analyses and heritage impact assessments have ever been taught anything about it. I don't know whether you're concerned, but I'm concerned. But I'm also concerned about individuals undertaking inspections, condition surveys of traditional buildings without having to demonstrate they know much about it. So they are some of my other concerns. I've got loads of them, but I haven't got time to talk about them all today, but I'll give you another concern here. In fairness to PAS 2035, it is taking a really, really good attempt to improve the situation, and it has improved the situation. There's no doubt about that. And if a project comes under ECO, which is the Energy Company Obligation Scheme, then any company the Energy Company Obligation Scheme are schemes of retrofit which are undertaken to homes where the families are principally suffer from fuel poverty, and the money comes from the energy companies. And it says under ECO, and there's an ECO 4 coming out very soon, that that you must comply with PAS 2035. That's great, because PAS 2035 says, not in these words, that where you've got insulation materials, they must be compatible with the existing building fabric. Now, the existing building fabric largely comprises building fabric which is both hygroscopic and vapor permeable. So it receives moisture, releases moisture, readily absorbs moisture, and the insulation material will not be detrimentally affected by that moisture at all. Which are the right insulation materials to use? So ECO has to comply with that. But within ECO, it stipulates the long guarantees which are required for the insulation materials which are being installed. The unfortunate thing is that nearly all, or almost all, the materials which have long guarantees are not suitable for traditional buildings. Now, I don't know whether this is correct or not, but I've met many hundreds of people on my courses, and many of them work under ECO, and this is what they're telling me, and I'm sure they're telling me the truth, because I asked the question: if you're working under ECO and you've got to comply with PAS 2035, but you also need these long-term guarantees, what materials are you going to be using? Are you going to be using the materials which are correct materials without the guarantee, or will you be using the materials which are not correct, but they do have the long guarantee? They said we need to use the materials with the long-term guarantee, which are not using the right materials. So when we think back at this example I showed you in my stake, Kyra and my stake in South Wales, believe me, those types of installations to some extent are still going on today, in fact right now, because of this. And that is another one of my concerns that needs to be addressed, I would say, in my humble opinion. Now, do you have to use the IHBC guidance? No, you don't. Do you have to use BS 7913 in the way I've described through the IHBC guidance? No, you don't. But it is the right approach. It is the holistic approach. And I would say that is the ideal approach you should be taking, I would say. Do we have to comply with PAS 2035? Well, publicly funded housing retrofit, a lot of it has to right now, and I dare say all of it will have to in time. Do anybody have to comply with PAS 2038? Not at the moment, but there's only one reason why UK government has funded development of that standard, I would say, is because it will come into force in the future. In fact, I'm delivering many in-house training sessions to local authorities and other organisations that say that they feel this is on the cards, that if they want to get funding for retrofitting their non-domestic buildings in the future, then they're going to have to comply with past 2038. So they're getting geared up to it. So that's about the compliance. Now, because of limited time, I haven't been able to provide you with all the knowledge you really need. Yeah, but you can get more information from some other places. If you're going to the Aberdeen annual school, the IHBC annual school, then I look forward to meeting you there, because I will be delivering a lecture, a presentation on this subject, and you'll get more information there. So if you want to sign up to that, you can go to the IHBC website and you can find out all about it. It's a hybrid event, so you can do it online as well. And if you want to find out even more about this subject, then one of the core parts of the IHBC annual school taking place in Swansea in 2023 is about this subject. And if you can't wait for all of that, you can also sign up to the Level 3 Award 2-day course through the Environment Study Centre there. So they are places where you can get additional information, as well as to heritage bodies such as Historic England, which have got some very good information there as well.